G'day everyone, welcome to the Act Up podcast, and we've got a really cool guest on today, a really good friend of mine, Jonathan Roumie. It's funny because there might be a video version of this, so you can see us kind of doing a little bit of a face, like really good friend. I don't know,
but that's pushing it. It's a bit much, kind of presumptuous.
But yeah, it's really great to have you on, man. I've been wanting to chat to you a little bit, and obviously, as you know, for those who are listening, this is like a acting style podcast, performance art, that sort of thing. And it's. I mean, we work together on The Chosen. You play Jesus, which is it's nice and simple. It's just you don't have to like prelude it with the disciple or the Baptist or anything like that. It's just people generally know who Jesus is.
Yes. He's fairly well known in Western culture.
Fairly well known. So yeah, it's really interesting because arguably it's got the most pressure on it with regards to a role playing on The Chosen. And I wanted to kind of ask you a few questions about that, but maybe we leave that for a quick second because you and I share a huge passion with voiceover and that sort of thing. So I don't know, that might be something that people don't hear much of. I'm not sure how much you do digress about your voiceover stuff and how you started out with it. But I really want to chat to you about it because maybe I'll learn something because I really want to. I've done voiceover work very, very in a limited capacity. Mostly my voices have been with a face, so I've done sketch comedy and had to do impressions and stuff. But yeah, I want to know a little bit about perhaps the start of your career because I believe you did start in voice work, right?
I did. The first acting job I ever did professionally was voiceover for MTV. I was being a mimic from the time I'm pretty young. I remember growing up, and I mean, this is dating myself, but I remember seeing President Reagan on television and just doing impressions of him, and people be like, "Wow, that sounds pretty close," in a kid voice, obviously, but still, it was something that I've always just had a knack for and just had an interest in, and just kind of parroting people and seeing how close that I could copy somebody's voice, because I just found it fascinating. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the musician's ear or what that's about. Are you a musician as well?
I'm not, but it fascinates me that you say that because I could sketch really well as a kid, and a lot of what, and I kind of, my cooking skills are only if I see it, I can do it. And I've come to the conclusion I'm just a good mimic. I can copy fairly well. And I feel like I see someone's face and I become obsessed with their face as they talk. And I'm like, I know how you talk because I can see your mouth and how it's contorting.
That's interesting. Because I used to draw as well, and I was pretty good at it. And I never connected the audio and the visual through the lens of mimicry or like just repeating or being able to reproduce sound or visuals, but in terms of talent. But I never thought of that like that. But I wonder, there must be some kind of connection somewhere. But so I started for this show called Celebrity Deathmatch. It was already running. And
we had that in Australia. I can't believe that was you. Because can you tell us some of the voices that you would have done on that?
Yeah, well, I did like 25 different voices over the course of 3 seasons of that show. And I did I did George W. a couple of times. I did the first character I ever did on that was Tony Danza from Who's the Boss? Nice. And and I forget who he was even fighting, but it was a lot of like, my impression was like, "Hey, Angela, get the goal, will you?" Or something like that,
Angela,
just along those lines.
I was trying to remember what her name was.
Mona, and just throwing out names, and they're like, "Yeah, it's good enough," So, so I got to sort of cut my teeth on that show as a performer, and then just kind of honing my mimicry skills. And then that led to other stuff, led to wanting to do voiceover and cartoons, which it was years before I booked any other animated work. but then doing commercials, I did voiceovers for commercials. I started doing video games in the early 2000s. And that became something that I ended up doing a fairly decent amount of work for. And now, and this year, actually, I just started hitting a bit of a stride in the animation world again. So I did a feature that's coming out this fall for Stephen Colbert's company, and all political satire stuff. Again, doing impressions of politicians, and then I started work on 2 different animated series for Netflix. So we'll see.
Wow.
We'll see where they go. And and just doing various accents and dialects and all sorts of characters. So it's just been, to me, it's like finally getting to realize a childhood dream of working in animation and stuff. So, but in between, I've developed this on-camera career, which I never actually wanted. I mean, I never wanted to be on camera. I just always thought, like, if anything, voiceover was going to be my gig, and then it just ballooned.
Well, let's talk about that connection between something like voice work compared to acting. I do want to, this is probably now in the middle, because you said you started with voice work and then there was camera work in between that. Something that I found, especially being an impressionist voiceover person, or at least mimic like yourself, is I found myself in my I didn't have early jobs. I just had early auditions or early acting school things. And one thing I found myself doing and being... I would find comfort in doing characters. And so then, especially in Australia, really boring over here, crappy soap operas and whatnot, they would just be like, we just want to hear George's voice. And I'm like, can I do an American accent at least? And like, no, we just want Australian. And I struggled with that. I'm wondering if, because where I found my stride being an impressionist is creating a character and then using the character that's been created to then fully immerse myself in the role. I wanted to ask you about that jump between impersonating someone and then doing, I guess, a real person on television. Did you use any of your skills as a voice artist? Does character creation come from there because you can mimic people? Is it harder to create a new character because there's nobody to mimic?
I think about this. I'm reminded of this sketch from Saturday Night Live that the late Phil Hartman did. And it was about a guy who didn't know what his real voice was because he did so many different characters. He would just basically, it was like the best of Phil Hartman in like one sketch. And nice. I can't remember the name of the sketch, but he was just switching and switching and switching. And there might have even been song in it. And I can't remember. I want to say that like in the end, you could hear who he was. Like he had a couple of lines as himself, but I don't even remember the sketch that well. But at times I can understand. I've tried to really reflect on what that is, the psychology behind what that is, and what it's about to go into preferring to kind of escape from your own sound or your own. And it probably stems from some kind of, for me, from some kind of insecurity with myself and just never having had this sense of confidence growing up as a kid. I got picked on a bit as a kid and bullied and not as bad as other people, but I was just kind of quiet and shy and small. And then eventually I filled in and then just found my voice through and then after college, really. It was after college that I started working as an actor. And I think that working in the film industry helped bring me out of my shell. And so, but I still had these skills. So now with, I think, a little bit of confidence, which is something you really need when you're working as an actor, to be able to take the skills that you kind of could develop in your bedroom or your closet, just, doing these voices and creating these little scenes, by yourself. I think definitely when I played a couple of characters where, that are historical. Before I played Jesus, I played John Wilkes Booth. Again, another character who I don't know what he sounded like. but we have pictures of him at least. So there was, that to kind of go off of. And I think whether it's like finding a look, working from the outside in, finding a piece of clothing, finding a voice, finding, even like a prop, a coin, or something you put in your pocket that kind of connects you to the material or to the character. Some things are going to be stronger than others in bringing out that character and really, grounding you in who that person is. And it's just a matter of trying to find what that is. Sometimes it's not even a tangible thing. Sometimes it just could be, if you're doing effective memory or some kind of sense memory exercise where you're recreating sensorially the circumstances of being in a certain place at a certain time in your life, or some kind of recreating some kind of nostalgia that evokes an emotional reaction that is fitting for whatever the scene is, and that becomes the starting point. Sometimes it's, there's even other kinds of approaches that I like something called externals, or like where you're working for, it could be animals. You could be working for, like a lunchbox that's sitting there, and all of a sudden now trying to, inhabit and take on the characteristics of what it is to be a hollow piece of aluminum, that's kind of square, and what does that feel like? And there's the wonderful thing about what the work that we do is that there's a million ways to get to the same result, to the desired result, which is, emotional and organic truth within the context of a scene. And so I think voices definitely help me in some areas, and then in other areas, it becomes kind of like part of the costume,
Yeah.
like with the Jesus accent. To me, that rooted me in the culture because it comes from my family, and the time. It doesn't specifically make me think of Jesus, you know what I mean? Like that, hearing that accent, it's just part of the accoutrement, the props, or the it's part of the costume for me, the vocal costume, if you will. There's other things that for me will connect me more to his character in other ways that are not quite tangible.
Well, I want to come back to Jesus in a second, because you said something really interesting about, the creation of John Wilkes Booth, with the idea of maybe is it a coin or something, and I do want to probe to see if there is anything like that for Jesus. But I'll put a pin in that, because you did mention something about embodying a lunchbox, and that does that come from any kind of training, or is that any type of research that you've had, or is that just learnt on the job through theater? I mean, do you have background in theater, by the way? We've talked about it.
I have, yeah, I've done some theater, not a whole lot of theater. I'm not
Right.
super well read in plays because I trained later in life as an actor. And when I went to train, it was with very specific purpose and an idea about what I did and didn't want to do. And I was working in the film industry, so I didn't have the time or the luxury, to be able to just stop working for 2 years to go to a conservatory. It just wasn't something I could do at that point in my life, because I went to film school, and then now I was working in the film industry. So I went and studied craft and all of that stuff, like working for like an inanimate object, which is what the lunchbox would fall under. It's absolutely. I think there's a few different styles of training that delve into that. I studied the Eric Morris system, under his New York protege, Anthony Vincent Bova, who's a brilliant coach in New York City. And then with Eric himself, who, funny enough, I literally ran into him a few blocks from where I live. He was having coffee. The guy is about 90 years old, and he's still doing virtual classes, like
Recently?
5 and 6 hour classes.
So
Like 2 days ago.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll run into him.
Yeah.
when I move back.
when you come back here, yeah. I mean, he's and he's still writing books. I mean, the guy is a legend. And I spent a week doing like an immersive class with him. Just as I started training in New York, I came out to California for 2 or 3 weeks, and I spent like 5 days in this like week-long immersive sort of a acting camp, if you will, like 15 hours a day, just training. And it sort of thrust me like 3 grades ahead of where I was, in the class when I started. And it really completely changed how I worked, because I mean, I didn't have a system, and I was just starting to learn this system. And then hearing it from the guy that developed the system, who studied with Lee Strasberg, who studied with a bunch of method teachers, who taught Jack Nicholson for a time, and a bunch of other famous actors. Um, to me, it was just, it was extraordinary. And I came away with so much, because it was really about getting to, the level of truth. I mean, but at the end of the day, even Eric will tell you, if it works, use it. Any good teacher worth his salt will never say, well, this is the only way to do it. And if you're doing something else, then you're not acting. That's a fakery, or that person is just pretty much a snob about their technique. But if whatever it is, if it works, you use it. So working for inanimate objects, it's part of a system called externals, where you're not coming at a role from an emotional kind of place within yourself. You're looking to find that place. You're not starting with like a memory or something like that, or starting with something that's going to make you, if the scene is, you're depressed in the scene, and now you're working for, when I say working for something, that means you're trying to put yourself in a place where you can feel the feelings that the character feels in that scene. Let's say if it's the guy is depressed, now I'm working to be, well, what in my life, if I'm using, if I'm doing the method, what in my life makes me feel, what has happened in my life that I can recall, that allows me to feel a state of depression that is similar to what this character is going through, that is also still, safe to me, for me psychologically. So it's not that, it's like, what might evoke that, by not focusing on like the exact, emotional memory, but what will maybe stimulate that through some other means. Like if I don't want to touch my own personal life and my own personal history, I don't have to. I can go with externals and be like, you know what, this guy, he's let's say he's not depressed. He's like, he's tough, but he's hollow, and he's shallow, and like, what might I want to work for that would give me that sensation. So if I find, a lunchbox is kind of thin, but he's metal and it's kind of boxy, and I just start trying to take on the features of what that is, and then how might that just change my voice, like if I was just a lunchbox or something, just standing there, just very really not paying attention to, just there's nothing inside, and I'm just maybe I'm looking past you as you're talking to me, I'm not quite listening, and all of a sudden these qualities start to come out that I don't know where they came from. It just came from like trying to embody the sensation that this, looking at this thing gives me. It could be a rock, it could be a paperclip, it could be a piece of glass, it could be anything. So
it's very similar. That sounds really similar to like character creation at the Groundlings, where you kind of, you build a character from, actually you build them from you build it from a point of view, and you could build it from a face. You could actually get the point of view from a person's face, or you could get the face from a point of view. If you were snobby, you'd be like, ew. And like, people can't see this if you're not watching the video, but hopefully this is out on video. But if you're like, ew, all of a sudden your lips are pursed and your nose is up, you can be like, and then this is the person, like, and then they speak quick. They kind of speak quick. And if I do want to deepen, I could speak quick like this. And then all of a sudden I'm this guy. Like, what are you doing? Like, and all of a sudden, like, he's now got New York accent for some reason. I don't know. You can move in and out with all those. I love that. I love that application of technique. I wanted to ask you, firstly, in the timeline of, let's just say now is you, and then you've got Celebrity Deathmatch. What is it, the timeline? You don't have to say years, but like in the middle, when did you do that training with Eric, roughly? Middle, 25%, a few years ago.
Third of the way in.
A third. Oh, cool. Yeah. And then you start getting some like on-screen work now. Do you start using a lot of the stuff you learned from Eric then, and do you still apply it now? Do you find?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do the work whenever I can. Like, I couldn't wait to get the opportunities to do the work when I was studying, but they were fewer and further between, obviously. But I was taking other classes at the time, like these master on-camera classes with a famous acting coach named Bob Krakauer in New York City. And so I remember going into his class after I got back from LA, and he's like, he used to call me Johnny. He's like, Johnny, what'd you do? What happened? I'm like, I just studied with Eric Morris. And he was like, well, whatever you did, it's working. So I'm like, great, I feel like I just felt like I had a map now, whereas before I was just trying to go on instinct, and there were limitations, and I was afraid to try other kinds of characters, and there were certain characters I'd be like, there's no way I could do that. And then studying with Eric and having a craft, they're like, yeah, I could do that if I needed to, and this is how I would do it. And so it just freed me up and gave me a sense that I could, do anything as an actor. When you have the skills necessary, then you become fearless. And a lot of people, especially when they're starting out, I don't know if have you encountered this, like where people feel that that their natural talent will suffice for a career. And it's like, well, you might get a few jobs, but you can't sustain that as a career, because if you're going to be doing all these different roles, like how do you have consistency? How do you show up, for, a 30-day shoot? If you're showing up every day, and if you're doing 10 takes, how do you make sure you can keep it going for 10 takes? Because if you're just like, I'm just going to wing it, I don't see how that's sustainable, unless you're just a genius.
Yeah, it's kind of like doing like weights at the gym. I always love equating acting to the gym, because people think that it's not a muscle that can't be worked, and you need to get abs for it. I guess it's like if you go into the gym and you bench, I don't know what pounds are to kilos. I would say you bench 100 kilos. Let's just say maybe it's 150 pounds or something, or 120 pounds. You do it once, and you're like, yeah, that was really. But if you were to do that over and over again with that crap technique, you'd probably get an injury. And so you need to go, no, start lower. You need to have the proper technique, and then you can then do it sustainably. Because like you're saying, I was the same. I felt the raw talent could have been there, but I was erratic, and there were little things like the emotional connection was there for me, but I did some classes at NIDA, which is the National Institute of Dramatic Art here in Australia. It's in Sydney. That's where like Russell Crowe went, and Hugo cool. Weaving. I think Cate Blanchett goes there as well.
Awesome.
So I didn't actually study there. I just did the paid classes like that. You kind of like the free ones, not free ones, but didn't take much to get into those classes. But they would just tell me little things like your face is moving too much, and those are like, you need to find a way to.
And you need those. You need those, especially when you're working on film and television.
Oh, yeah. You need to be emotionally available, but at the same time, keep your face really still. I was just watching Tom Cruise in Magnolia. My goodness, his face is dead still. And there's so much coming through. I think it's a great performance, and he does that really well. And I'm just wondering, he was so young when he started out. I'm like, where has he learned this? And that it could just be, the thing is, there are people, like you said, it is the raw talent will get you through, but that's 1 in 100, 1 in a million, 1 in 1,000. I don't know what it is. By and large, if it doesn't work,
pretty high.
Yeah. If it doesn't work first time, you need the schooling.
You even take for actors of my generation and probably yours as well. Like when you go back to where screen acting changed with like, Marlon Brando and the guys of that era, they studied with Stella Adler, and they studied with Lee Strasberg, and all of them studied. De Niro and Pacino, they studied. Everybody trained. They trained because that's just what you do. It's like for some reason the arts are a discipline where people feel like they don't need training. Like in any other job, like you wouldn't get work if you didn't know what you were doing, if you weren't hired, if you weren't trained. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you can have talent for the skill, but if you're in situations where, let's say you're working with somebody in a scene, or whether it's a play, and they're not giving, the idea of technique, I feel like it's in for the moments when you're on stage or you're in a scene with a person and the chemistry is not perfect the entire time, and you're looking for something from that other actor to stimulate you for this next moment, and you don't get it, and then it's like, they're not giving me what I need. And what do I do then? What do I do then? Well, then I've got a technique to fall back on and, resuscitate whatever's, collapsed in the scene. And I'm not limited to whatever potential limitations or blocks, let's say my scene partner is having, if that happens. Luckily that hasn't, that's rarely happened. There's been one or two times in my career where I can remember thinking like, I just didn't know what to do, and I just had to resort to just do, relegated myself to having to go into one of my tools to just create a scene or create an emotional exchange that wouldn't have happened otherwise if I had just relied on the interpersonal, dialogue between myself and the other actor.
Can I ask you, because it was a really interesting example you gave there, and it's kind of, scratching the surface of what you're doing on The Chosen with, your work as Jesus, but if you're in a scene, whether it's on The Chosen or not, and it doesn't mean that the other actor is annoying you or anything like that, but if you are not getting something, or if it's not even to do with the other actor, it's something on set, would you ever go into the moment of frustration and use it for the character?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's...
So Jonathan feels something, therefore we're going to see Jesus feeling it.
You have to honor truth in a moment-to-moment basis, because that's what makes moments on film stand out, or moments in theater. It's like the things where you don't expect, and you're like, whoa, that was real, and that was, it might have been caused by something like some kind of frustration. If it goes completely against the, what's in the script as far as the emotional order is concerned, or what you're meant to be doing. If, let's say, you're frustrated and you're playing a scene where you're in love with somebody, and you're like, okay, how do I work this in? And maybe sometimes it is an explosion, and then you're like, okay, I tried to work it in, it didn't work. And then at least you got it out of your system. And then now you can maybe find other ways. But even just that, honoring that moment and expressing that, well, now the other actors now all of a sudden like, oh, they have to shift on that. They have to respond to that as well. And so something else really interesting might come out of that. But at the very least, you're being truthful in the moment, and you're not, just giving some regurgitated idea of what the emotion is called for in the scene, or what the performance. You're not just staging this, this shoddy recreation of an emotional life. It's actually moving, it's alive, and it's energizing. Like, one of my favorite actors, because had this quality in almost everything he did in the very early part of his career, like, was Al Pacino. So if you watch early Al Pacino, like Dog Day Afternoon, Panic in Needle Park, like, there was this element of danger, Serpico, like, you watch the guy and you just felt like, I didn't know what he was going to do, because he just was moment to moment, and you could just see this guy was just living on film. And the fact that it's a film and they're doing several takes and they're doing reverses and they're doing, coverage, you just wonder how somebody could be that raw and instinctive, and like, especially at that time. And he was just, he's one of my favorites of all time.
Can I ask you, what do you reckon? Because you said the early part of his career, and the funny thing is that this is Kevin Jackson now. He used to be the head of NIDA. He taught Cate Blanchett. He's like the person that all these NIDA graduates thank, all these like esteemed Australian actors that you see. And he really doesn't like Al Pacino, but he says it from the perspective of, I don't like what he became, because his big thing is about honoring the script. And he felt like maybe as Pacino got older and more, status on the set, he started going, no, I know what's better on this script. I know better than the writer. And then what ends up happening is every role now becomes, because you're the one writing the lines, we now expect what we're going to hear from the actor, because the actor's writing their own lines as opposed to hearing a different writer's voice. Do you think there was a shift in Pacino's career? Because you did specify early Pacino. Do you think it changed at all?
I specify the early part of his career because for me, that was the most exciting and diverse range of roles that he did. And just the work was just for me, just consistently, engaged. And then, I mean, he had, even in the late 80 or 92 Scent of a Woman, there was this kind of throwback to that kind of danger. So
He's still
I
the
mean,
same actor, you would say? He didn't lose anything?
no, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's harder when you get older because it's, he's not able to move obviously like he could move, and because he was just very like, at times he felt frantic and frenetic and physically energized. So you could see that. And then as you know, people, as humans slow down and get older, it's like they can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It was, but I mean, I think the energy is still in there. It just doesn't come out the same way. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. Well, I want to finish up on this idea of using all this experience that you did have, because you land the role of Jesus quite. I mean, before The Chosen, you get to do it for Dallas, don't you? In a short film, and you kind of have to create the character.
Yeah.
Then there's a few things that you mentioned here in terms of not only your training, but little ideas that maybe you've picked up, or maybe you have got it from your training. The one that I kept a note of here was you had a coin for John Booth. And then you've also mentioned your training with Eric. I want to go back to that moment where you first play Jesus. What's the process from Jonathan to create this character? Do you have something physical that you kind of keep on you? Do you use some of your technique from Eric, or I mean, do you feel something? Because obviously, from your faith, you would be connected to this person. So I mean, what's the process like when you're creating a character so iconic, essentially from scratch?
Yeah. Um, it's a tough one with Jesus because, you know, obviously he's a historical character, but there's no footage. We don't know what he sounds like. So I'm left to kind of just make these choices, which I started the process with Dallas. But then even looking at the older work with Dallas, I think I settled in with the character after a few iterations. I think it wasn't until, probably till The Chosen where I really kind of started to settle in, I feel,
Right.
with what Jesus, how he should be
Mm-hmm.
as a character on screen. And I mean, I think to an extent I'm still finding stuff, I think I'm still finding him, because it's you know, I don't know, when you get new scripts, you have a new season for a show. It's a newly living, breathing thing. Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
the order for the day for that season might be a different side of him that we haven't seen yet, or a different angle or a perspective of his life that is exposed that, might be something that I'd never even considered, before. I don't have a specific little, I dare use the word talisman, not in any, um, abiblical or unbiblical sense, but just like some kind of thing that connects me to the character. Um, I think part of the costume sort of starts to create,
Yeah.
the character for me, um, but I think for him, it's mostly about my spiritual prep, and that to me is my road into the characters. How much prep I do spiritually, how where I'm at, like as a Catholic, I would be going to mass, I would be going to confession, just trying to clean out all the spiritual baggage to make sure that when I step foot on set, that I'm open to trying to be a channel for that spiritual energy. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of where he comes from for me.
Mm-hmm.
um I'm starting work on a project now that is also a historical character, and it's more of a modern character, and so I can watch footage of him, and so I immediately find myself gravitating now towards the more traditional modalities of training that I took on, and I'm working with voice and trying finding his voice, and finding the placement of this guy's voice.
This is
And
for a new character, right?
this is for a new
Yep.
character, yeah. um And so really excited about this process, because I haven't quite got to do this kind of work in a while, because it just didn't work for the Jesus character, so this is, to me, it's kind of like being back in school again, and I'm going through my old books and notes and things like that, and yeah, I'm excited to try some new things, and maybe try, even try out some of the externals to see if that works for this guy, so it's very much the exploration phase of the work for me right now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so your interpretation of Jesus would have changed massively from short film to season one. I'm actually going to kind of ask this in two parts, because it's short film to season one and then season one to season two. But I'm going to focus on that first segment very quickly. And so something changed in between those two for your interpretation of the character. I guess you got a lot more to work with.
I wouldn't say massively. But it was, well, from the first short film. I had played Jesus once before in a theatrical multimedia project about a nun who became a saint, Saint Faustina. And between that and then Dallas's short film, it felt like there was a shift. I think I was finding the accent more. I was trying to hone in on what he sounded like. And then with the first short film for Dallas, it's so few lines. So, there wasn't much character to kind of show, and he's on the cross already. If I had to go back and do that again, when hopefully we get to season 6 or 7, when I get to do that, I think it'll be different. I think I felt like I didn't quite have all of the facets of Jesus figured out, and I hadn't lived, so to speak, through the history that we're creating now.
Well, maybe no one has
to get to that point. Well, no, I don't think anybody has. Yeah. Well, nobody has, actually. I mean, we've never, this has never been done before. So, So I think that's why when we get to the crucifixion in the series, it's going to be unlike anything and any other emotional experience that myself as an actor will probably have ever had. And then as an audience member, it's just going to be, I think, excruciating. It's going to be brutal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then is there anything in season 2 where you explored something else in Jesus's character that maybe you weren't able to explore in season 1? I can already guess maybe there's a little bit of a lightheartedness or something that perhaps in the dialogue or whatnot. Was there anything else?
Yeah, I think more of his, we got to see a little more humor. We got to see a little more frustration, the Sons of Thunder.
I love that. I love that day so much, by the way, because
that was really, really fun.
It was weird because I was kind of I wanted, and they ended up using it because Dallas just wanted options. I remember him because I was petulant. I didn't want to look at you because you're the teacher. And you've just, you've kind of given me a bit of detention, and no way, but I'm obsessed with you and I love you and everything. But I just wanted to stare at the floor. And then Dallas went, let's try one where you're actually looking at him. But if you look at the footage they've chosen, I am just like sheepish, and I loved that. I loved it because, we don't see that side of Jesus too much in the series. And then that's the first time we see it when it's, arguably the beloved disciple who's there instigating things. I felt that. It felt great, by the way. You live for those moments as an actor.
Oh, yeah. What did you think when they took out the pillow scream, or the blanket scream?
I completely forgot about that. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, I actually forgot. Did not even notice that wasn't in there.
Until now.
Yeah, just now.
Oh, wow.
You just seeing the cogs turn in my head as I go, oh, that's gone. Yeah, no, it kind of felt like...
I think it worked, though, but because I think seeing it now, it's just like, because then it would have stopped the flow of you ramp up and then we're coming down and then there's this interlude, and I didn't think when I saw it was there, I'm like, where'd it go? And then I'm like, actually, when I watched it again, I'm like, it flows really nice. And you come out of that, moment of anger, like you still, it's like you took the moment anyway. Like the moment's there. Yeah. We just didn't see it in the way that we originally shot it with. I don't know. I've seen it on some BTS stuff out there, but I don't know if people know what the original scene was. They may be like, "What are you guys talking about?"
Yeah, yeah. Well, originally, yeah. So Jesus
Yeah,
hands John like a hanky to go and like, and
yeah,
you know what? Actually, we were discussing that as well. Like, I think you were going. So, what am I handing this to him? Was that the conversations we were having? It's like I'm handing this to him so that he can scream and like get it off his chest. Like, even then, it was a little bit like a little bit up in the air, and we could always
yeah,
remove it. But like you
yeah.
said, it's kind of like a prop to do the job of the actors. Whereas if the
I,
actors are able to do it, then you kind of don't need the prop, you know?
yeah,
So, yeah. So,
yeah.
long story short, we're supposed to use a hanky for John to scream into, but now he
Or
kind of got,
it was like a blanket.
yeah,
It
like
was
a
like a
rag.
little cloth or rag or something like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think the only other difference, other than those kind of, facets of his personality that we didn't really get to see as much in season one. For me, it's like just trying to find stillness. And I think that's just stillness as an actor,
Hmm.
and really trying to just ground myself at all times,
And what techniques do you
that's
use for stillness and groundness on set?
I think I do some deep breathing, or I really just try to focus on the other actor. I try to focus on, if it's you, I just really try to consider you in front of me, and what I know about you, and what I know about the history of our characters on screen, and just try to be as still as possible, because this is a visual medium, and like when your face is up there, if you're doing all this sort of stuff, it just becomes so distracting. And I've learned by watching myself, which is, as an actor, just the value of like on camera audition classes is priceless, because you watch yourself. Hopefully, if it's a good class, you're watching yourself, and somebody's like, yeah, you see that head moving, it's like you got Parkinson's. Well, don't
Yeah.
do that, because that you'll never. In fact, I heard George Clooney telling this story. I think it was to Howard Stern, that when he was on ER, I think Steven Spielberg was producing, I think, some of the
Hmm.
early seasons, or might have been a producer on the entire series of ER. And like early on, he came over, or was he a producer? What did he do? Did he just stop by? Or I can't remember. But he came over, I think he was producing, and he came over to George, because he had seen like he like moved around a lot, and he was using his hands a lot and everything. And I tend to use my hands a lot as well. So I've had to kind of really like get a hold on that. And he said, if you moved your head less, you'd be a movie star.
Oh,
And
wow.
he's like, what? Yeah. And he took that note, and shortly thereafter became a movie star. So he took the advice, but everybody needs the advice at times. You got to relinquish your ego and know when you don't know everything, and happily take positive criticism, and just be better, make yourself better. I mean, I'm always just trying to be better at this role, and whatever it is, and just a better actor, because I just love the work. I mean, you're the same way. You just love the work so much, and you just want it to be as good as it possibly can.
Yeah, no, thanks, man. And you know what? Like it shows on screen. Like it's I mean, it's safe to say, me personally, I think this is the best version of Jesus we would have ever seen on television is coming from you, man. And I'm sure you hear that a lot, but it's absolutely true. And by the way, I did search just then, just to cut that dramatic moment between us. He was a producer for the first season, Spielberg on ER.
It was the first season.
First season, then he left. Yeah, so he was probably straight. He just got on just to make George Clooney a movie star, and then buggered off and did a whole bunch of awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Dude, there's so much more I'm sure we could chat about. Not to mention, because we talk about it so much, your stuff off camera, all of your experiences. You worked on Ballers, I know, and I would love to pick your brain about how that sort of stuff does help an actor, because me and Austin talked about that just from the perspective of being an extra, but for other actors, being on sets, near sets, is absolutely priceless. But we'll get into that next time, man, because we try and make these as succinct as possible. And I always say, in every actor that comes on, is like I could chat for 2 hours, but we'll just make it another episode.
Well, we
So,
can chat a few more minutes if you want.
well, I want to ask you then, okay, but as the
Yeah.
last thing, because you did mention film school. When you say film school, do you mean studying
Yeah.
to make films or going as an
Correct.
actor? Okay,
No, I studied filmmaking. I was a
okay,
film major in college
right.
in New York City, at a place called the School of Visual Arts. It was a private art school, and they had very specific programs that were taught by working professionals, working craftspeople, editors, filmmakers, designers. It started as a school for cartooning in, I think, 1947, and then in the 60s and the 70s started to develop their film program. And from day one, we basically got to use film cameras. And now nobody shoots film anymore, but we were shooting film and making movies and learning how to edit. And as a prerequisite, we had to study acting, with a teacher, one class each semester. And I think my first semester acting teacher was Susan Batson, who became Nicole Kidman's coach, and she has her own school, and she was fantastic. And I remember being like the most terrified in any class. It was working in her class, because it meant I had to get up and just make an idiot of myself for 20 minutes or 30 minutes at a time. And it was then that I decided I would never be an on-camera actor, that I would, if anything, I would probably do voiceover.
Yeah, right.
And here I am today. So that didn't work out exactly as I planned. So
in a good way.
Fortunately.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, fortunately.
Well, I mean,
I got over myself and took a shot. So.
Yeah. So you study at film school then, but you end up doing so many other jobs. We've talked about it so much, and I want to, you've talked about it as well on your Instagram, so I can say, but you were Russell Brand's stand-in, for example, but you're doing all sorts of stuff like, helping with travel and rigging and, all sorts on set. Yeah. I mean,
I need to work, man. I needed money, I was broke. And when I left New York, I no longer had the stability of a film position. I was on crews as a location scout or a location manager. It was my jobs when I left, was that I had worked 10 years and built the career as a location manager, a scout mostly, and then a manager towards the end. And then I realized I was just becoming too logistic oriented for me as a position, and I needed to do something creative. And so when I left to pursue acting full time, all I had was my savings, and I had these skills, but those skills are a prerequisite to having a community that will employ you because you have those skills. And coming to LA, I didn't know anybody. There were different union rules. It was a unionized position here, what I was doing in New York. And I didn't know anybody. And so I just had to figure out other things. And years after I got here, I was like, well, you know what? If I'm going to make any kind of money, I might as well try to make money and accrue pension credits and try to qualify for health insurance. So I started doing background work. I had done that for a split second when I was acting in New York for a little bit, but not very much, because having worked on crew, you had a very different opinion about, background actors, because you now had to, in my department, I had to clean up after them. So, and they weren't very polite at times, most of the time. So I just had this very strong idea about oh man, I don't want to do background work. You don't want to be an extra, because it seems like, oh, cool, you're on a set. And then the reality is crew don't treat you great, and it's this weird cycle, because there are one or two, it's always one or two spoil the batch, right? So you get one or two extras that will steal a bunch of bananas on the way home, and then people are like, what is this guy doing, and then that just sets off this dynamic that is just awful for the next 30 days on the shoot, yeah. And gets very contentious at times, and other times it's great, but there's still the general having done this, I have no problems talking about this. There is the general dynamic between crew and background is not exactly simpatico. So when I got to the point where I just needed money, and I wanted to make sure that I tried to qualify for health insurance because I didn't have health insurance for like 10 years. I thought, well, screw it. I'm just gonna go and do this and do my thing, and at least I know what I need to do, and we'll see what happens. And so I went and I signed up at the agency here, where actors sign up and for background work, and I didn't get anything. I couldn't even and then all of a sudden I got one call to show up as like this Afghan villager in a Clint Eastwood movie. And I thought, well, I'm definitely doing that because I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to work with Clint Eastwood. So I'm just going to do this. And it was amazing. I just learned so much about like how Clint Eastwood works. Because you see what happens. And it was awesome. And the whole thing was like 6 or 7 hours and it was done. I mean, he shoots a quick day. Like you got there like 8, you were getting dressed and dusted and dirted up. And then like at 2:00, he comes in, he sets up the shot, like a bunch of tanks and Humvees. This was for 3:10 to Paris. And then he does the shot a couple of times, couple different angles. And he's like, okay, let's go. And then the day's over by like 4. Nice. And you're like, oh, cool. And then after that, I think I did one other day, and I'm like, I can't even get background days. Like I couldn't even get background work. Oh, I just was like, really, God? And then I got a call and I hadn't done anything on record as a stand-in before. I'd been a stand-in years before, but that wasn't on my resume. And then they just said it because I was 6 feet tall and they didn't even know, like my pictures were without a beard, I think. And they're like, do you have a beard? And I said, I do have a beard. They're like, do you still have long hair? I said, yeah. They're like, you want to be a stand-in for Russell Brand? And I said, sure. And then I ended up working for 2 seasons on the show, and I made health insurance, and I got to know Russell, and we became friends. And
do you learn anything from that as well? Like being, I mean, obviously you've given us an example of learning something off a Clint Eastwood set or just knowing how he works. But I mean, doing that 2 years, being a stand-in and just being around, is there stuff that you pick up at all that you take with you?
It was great because I got to see how like somebody in Russell's position, like what his responsibilities are. So I'm like just taking notes. This is before The Chosen. And I'm for the first season, it turned out that DP that was on the show, he preferred that the stand-ins are off book. And I'm like, wow, off book? They're like, yeah. So you come to set, you get the sides for the day, and sometimes there's monologues, and you're like, trying to learn a monologue as best as you can. And then if you need to pull it, you have it. But they encourage you to be as off book as possible. Wow. So I thought, what a great exercise. So it was like a memory building exercise.
Did you do an impression of it, by the way?
And then for kicks, I decided to do an impression of it. and apparently it left an impression. Me doing the impression, more on the producers. And at the end of the second season, the creator of the show, Stephen Levinson, he went to bat for me to put me in the final episode of the series. Wow. When they hadn't cast this one character. And so it was me in the scene. It would have been Russell Brand. It would have been this other video game team owner guy for like this, when they do the, what do they call them with the exhibitions, or when you have the
games con or something like that,
I don't know the name of them, but when like competitive gaming, right? Yeah. So there are these team owners, and they have
esports. Yeah.
So there was like the esports team owner. There was his partner that hadn't been cast, and there was Russell. So Russell had long hair and a beard. The esports owner guy had long hair and a beard. And then Stephen called me over. He's like, Jonathan, I want you to read this. And I'm like, oh, sure. And he says to me, I think this is for the second season. I had just finished the first half of season 1 of The Chosen, I think. And he's like, so I heard you're playing Jesus. I'm like, yeah. He's like, you want to read something for me? I said, sure, Lev, I'll whatever you want. And so he's like, here, take this, go work on it for a couple of minutes, come back and we'll work out the scene. It's Lev's from New York, so from Long Island actually, which is where I grew up. So it was a very comforting accent because I grew up hearing that accent. So it was like we were neighbors. And so I come back and I just started reading the scene with his assistant, and he's directing me. He's like, faster, all right, there you go, more confidence, just like talking me through it. And he's like, that's it. I can work with this. Well, and then the casting director is just standing off camera. She's like, Lev, he's got a beard. There's 3 guys with beards and hats. You can't put 3 like in it visually. Like he's like, listen, this is what we're going to do. And we take care of our own. And that's what we're going to do. This is our guy. Okay. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. And she's like, fine. And so, what they did, actually, I didn't have a hat. And so to make me different from the other guys, they gave me a hat. And then they took Russell out of the scene, and they didn't, it was just me and this other kid. And then they made us brothers or something. So they're like, well, we'll just make them brothers. So like, all right, well now we're brothers. So yeah, it was, so the whole thing ended up in just slowly building this relationship that I didn't even know that I had, but apparently you don't know who's watching you. You don't know if you're being observed. So you use it as an opportunity to be on your game. And if it works out and people respect you and they respect your skills and your work ethic, it ends up, I ended up getting a part on the show. So that wasn't something that I ever expected, So it worked out nicely.
It's all about those reps. It's as if you were doing training, you didn't even know it, and then all of a sudden you're primed and ready because you've been doing these lines this whole time. I have to watch that, by the way, because I've watched it's Ballers, isn't it? All the way to the end, and I haven't seen the last season, so no wonder I didn't recognize you being on it, because they took them a while to do it, because The Rock's doing about 600 projects at once, so I'll have to check it out. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Awesome,
thanks for, as I always say, thanks for acting up with me here. I'm going to have you back on the show, and I'm going to bring all my stuff with me when we film The Chosen. So maybe,
Sweet.
on one of these like low weekends, if you ever get a restful weekend whilst we're filming season 3, I'll set up the cameras and we'll sit back and we'll enjoy a nice drink. And awesome. swirl around maybe an apple juice, or perhaps even
ice cubes.
Ice cubes.
Some
seltzer, perhaps. Yes.
Seltzer and ice cubes and a sprig of lime.
And we'll watch The Office, and we'll do all sorts. We'll do all sorts. But,
that's right,
dude. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on, and I'll chat to you soon, mate.
Awesome, man. Talk to you later.